Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, sponsored by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm your host, Randy Johnston, along with co-host Brian Tankersley. Today, we're pleased to have a special guest with us, Rahul Mahna, who's a partner at Eisner Advisory Group, and he's going to talk to us about the 5 cybersecurity risks for high net wealth individuals. So, Rahul, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you very much, Randy. It's a pleasure to be here with you. By way of background and introduction, my name is Rahul Mahna, and I'm the managing partner of Eisner Amper's Outsourced IT practice. Our mandate is to protect our clients by using best practices of what we're seeing out there today, what's happening in the industry, what's happening with governance and compliance, and putting a solution together to robustly protect the clients in all aspects.
So as our regular listeners know, our sessions on security are basically trying to provide practical guidance. Now, I know that you've written an article for Crane Currency, which we could refer, and I think our readers can find that as well. And in there, you've made really 5 different interesting points on several different risks. Would you like to speak to those for just a moment?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Being part of Eisner Amper, obviously I have a lot of accountants that talk to me, and I have a lot of accountants' clients that talk to me. So some of these ideas and topics are coming from what we're seeing within the firm and within our client base. And so with that, one of the overall things that we are seeing is a lot of our high net worth individuals have multiple bank accounts. It doesn't sound unusual to have a few, but even in my personal life, when I talked to my family about 2 years ago, we found 15 bank accounts that were scattered around. And so that does create a hardship for the financial advisor, whoever that might be, but it also creates a hardship to protect all of those assets. So one thing that we are trying to increase awareness around is if you have multiple bank accounts, if you're advising folks that have multiple bank accounts, it's really hard to centralize the security of those or to feel good that you have something simple such as multi-factor authentication in some manner that you're accessing those bank accounts. You can set those procedures up for 1 or 2, but if you expand out to 15, obviously your beta increases, your risk profile increases. So taking a look at where all your assets are and trying to consolidate them a little bit to create a heightened cyber awareness thought process is one of the topics we're looking at right now.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Now, Brian and I have taught multi-factor for a long time. Is there a particular platform that you're recommending to the clients?
Well, here's what we're seeing. We're seeing clients are deliberating between using the multi-factor platforms that they get for free and some that they pay for. We typically don't provide guidance on which is the right platform. We just like to make sure that they're using a platform that is enforced and supported by usually the financial institution that they're dealing with more than anything. That's where you really need to start with the security of the multi-factor. And then, of course, having a strong password after you MFA is really the next barrier to have.
Yeah, understood on that, Rahul. As it turns out, both Brian and I have some banking background, as it turns out, and I just categorically disagree with the text MFA that most banks are using. So, Brian?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You mentioned cryptocurrency and protecting some of these assets. What are some of the lessons learned from crypto and other things in your world?
Wonderful. We have found a lot of individuals try to get involved with currency in whatever cryptocurrency, as you mentioned, they might be involved in. I think the challenge over the last few years is how do you get involved? And so some of the advanced, I would say, clients of ours went directly and created wallets on their own. And then probably a couple of years ago, Coinbase became popular to have a more of a public and easier wallet to use. And so there became challenges with that. And so I think overall, people have different approaches. I think the third evolution now is you can actually go and buy an ETF, which just started in the last few months to make it even easier now. The first few iterations, to answer your question, the challenge became on having a secure way to keep your wallet in place. And so was it a USB stick where you'd put your code on and keep that USB stick? Well, we found some of our early clients, those USB sticks were getting lost. They forgot them or somehow get stolen, and there goes X thousands or millions of dollars. The second way was using a platform such as Coinbase, which is still very popular. And again, you have your password challenges. And so, in advancements there we've seen is trying to suggest using a third-party tool like a YubiKey. And YubiKeys, I think, are really a much stronger way to do it at a very low cost point. You can buy that key off Amazon these days for $50 or less. And I like that a lot. If you're going and I see you have one right in front of you, so we're talking the same thing.
Yeah, in fact, we've both known Stina Evanshar
Okay.
since she created those products, and we did cover those in our CES presentation a little earlier, a prior podcast. So it makes perfect sense to use these hardware keys to us
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah. And then
So
I think now with the ETFs, I think that makes it obviates a lot of the security where you could just call a broker and buy it like a stock. Pros and cons, of course, but a third generation, if you may.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a minute. You mentioned one of the risks is archaic technology. Um, my mother used to swear by her AOL email account. What's the problem there, and what's the problem with with old technology?
Um, if I can, I'll take a step back and put some context around it. So, taking an elder generation, like you mentioned, your mother and my elders as well, they started off probably around 2000, and that's back in the days where you used to get those CDs coming to your home, and those sounds that came from your US robotics modem, and you would dial in and you'd get your AOL email, and that's where many folks started getting their email accounts. And now fast forward, it's the year 2024, so you got 24 years. AOL became, your habit. And so many of that generation used AOL. For example, let's just focus there. And so they have 24 years of pictures, of chats, of email history. And so they're very attached to using that archaic technology. The reason I call it archaic is AOL has been bought and sold multiple times over that 25 years. And so the effort to increase the cybersecurity platform and hygiene around that platform is not as much there and in focus anymore. And so we just had a recent case where a client came to us where they were a victim of some identity theft. And really the issue was they had been corresponding with their CPA for 24 years on AOL. They had 24 years of tax returns in their AOL account, 24 years of PII information of them and their family. And so that data all became compromised. And truly because, nobody really is focused in on AOL and heightened security and new ransomware techniques. And so, it becomes a problem. And I understand the shifting emotional cost is high for that individual because they don't want to lose 24 years, but the risk return is incredibly unbalanced right now using those technologies.
I completely agree with you. And, I've talked to a number of practitioners, and I've told them, and I've told anybody I talk to that nothing says I'm not serious about cybersecurity and your privacy like a CPA having because a lot of our audience is practitioners, a CPA having an at AOL.com or an at gmail.com or a at hotmail.com email account, as opposed to having your own custom internet domain. It's really, I don't know how you can comply with the FTC safeguards rules and Circular 230 and the IRS requirements by using email like that. I just don't think you can.
Yeah, and Elwood Edwards, so many of us knew that name, that's for sure. But just a reminder that the .cpa domain may be a way for you to increase your security if you're a public practice firm. So we have talked about that in prior sessions as well.
That's well said. I completely agree with that comment. And for those that want to buy a domain or get secure email, you can go to Microsoft.com and it's $5. And so that investment, I think just, is well worth it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like we're talking about a big spender thing here. It's just it is painful to make that switch, but there are tools that consultants and managed service providers like Eisner can help you make that switch and pull in all that content and everything else. So talk to us about family members. It's family is just seems to be the gift that keeps on giving, especially when we get money involved in it. Talk to us about that.
I love the way you say that, the gift that keeps on giving. There's so many wonderful things about having your family and being involved with your family. I was part of a family business for 20 some odd years before joining Eisner, and I think it's wonderful. The downside that we see from a cybersecurity perspective is not all family members have the same heightened security awareness that other family members do. And the balance becomes, how do you handle those family members? And so some examples of that risk that we continually see from our financial advisors and our accounting team members trying to handle these situations are starting off with just password management and understanding the risk of having really weak passwords and allowing weak passwords to exist in a family office, for example, and how you do that. The second aspect that we see is just not a sense of cybersecurity hygiene. So we continually will face our accountants that will receive, let's call it a picture of a license for some reason, just on general email. And the family members will take a picture and think that that's okay because they have their iPhone, snap it, email it, and don't realize the implication. A quick side note, I'm not sure if you or your audience has done this. If you have an iPhone and just go to your photos and search for, just say, license, the iPhone technology now will actually search every image. And it's really quite alarming to me of how advanced that feature has become and what it can dig out of your photos, where you thought a photo is safe, or many people have historically thought a photo is safe. It's really not anymore.
I completely agree with you on that. And one other caution I would just mention that I'll just throw in, since you mentioned iPhone, by default, your iPhone and your Android phone both do something called geotagging on photos. And so what happens is it puts your latitude, longitude on there for photos. And so when you post things on social media, like you go to your grandkids' house, your grandkids' home to see them, guess what? Somebody that's a cyber criminal now can go in and look at those photos on social media that are shared publicly. They can right click and look at properties, and there's the lat long of where that kid is. And so they may inadvertently be making those children effectively a target for some kind of crime to get a ransom or other things like that.
And your point about the quality of the AI in the iPhone image scan is pretty stunning. Apple, of course, has purchased over 30 AI companies. And in my experimentation with it, I've actually searched on something obscure like dinosaur, and a small toy dinosaur in the corner of the image is recognized. So you can absolutely guarantee that the image recognition across the Microsoft Windows platform, the Google platform, or the Apple platform actually, I think, increases the risk, as it turns out. And when you consider the data exposure, Brian, which you and I have talked about so many times, with the MailChimp exposure from Intuit, and now with Google potentially buying HubSpot, both of those transactions are, data mining as far as I'm concerned. So as practitioners, we have to worry about protecting our data, just like Rahul, you're talking about it in terms of high net wealth individuals here. We have kind of a loosey-goosey approach to protecting data here in the United States. So that'll change a little bit with privacy laws, but those will take several years to catch up, as I see it.
I completely agree with that comment in terms of where we're going. I think last year, Brian, you talked a little bit about safeguards rule, just perhaps a little non sequitur, but I think appropriate to our conversation here is where is the government going with this? And so, I think this year has been a real turning point from our practice and what we are seeing, where we are definitely seeing a little bit more heightened awareness from, I would say, financial professionals, our clients themselves, and I would say C-suite. And so with that, I think there's been some cases in the last year where the C-suite was held liable on a personal basis for having poor information security policies, and I would say acting in a general duty of care to those stakeholders and shareholders that they're involved with. And I think that's a real turning point in my mind over what's happened in the last year. Drizzly was one case where the CEO was found liable. I'm not sure if you know about that case or not. We can talk about that. I think the Uber CTO a couple of years ago having some personal liability attached to their lack of care, I think, is another aspect. And I like the new provisions about if there is a breach, a much more heightened awareness to disclose that breach. Otherwise, you can be found, not acting in the right care as well. So I'll just take a pause there. And I know I went a little off topic, but it's definitely something we're seeing a lot more this year.
Yeah, and as you were talking about that, Rahul, I was considering, Brian has written a session for our K2 business called AI Confidential on privacy and artificial intelligence and many of the regulations around that. Again, probably a little off the topic for today, but it was stunning what was inside some of the license agreements, the ethics statements, and so forth, of a variety of.
And when you read, the other thing that folks need to know is that when you start reading the pronouncements, like the executive order that President Biden came out with last November on AI and privacy, and you listen to some of the comments that have been made by the commissioners of the FTC and other organizations like that, it's very clear that that privacy regulation is coming to town, whether or not it can get through Congress one way or another.
Yeah.
So I think that's an area that's where we're going to have more need for third-party attestation and third-party consulting, because the compliance on those things, from the proposed regs and other things I'm reading, the compliance is not going to be simple and it's not going to be cheap.
Yeah, you're right there, Brian, because if you look at that Executive Order 14110, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, and then compound that with the finally updated NIST standards from this year, the NIST framework getting updated to 2.0 finally. Those are some pretty radical shifts. Well, we're hoping, in terms of just thinking things through, are there any key recommendations that you'd make? I guess what I'm looking for is just, if you could only do one or two things, what might those be?
And in relation to an individual, a financial, like where, and who would I be giving that advice to?
Yeah, let's keep it over on the individual frame for just a minute, and then we might turn it to business.
Yep. So on the individual side, I would I probably have more than one or two, but I would say just be a little more thoughtful about where you are. So on the individual side, I would say our perspective used to be protect the castle. So an individual went to an office or a place of work that was secure. It's important for the individual to realize they've left the castle. They've left the means and bounds of security that were around them, the moats that were protecting them. And now they're on their own, really. And so our framework has been to protect the individual now. And how do we think about that? And so when an individual travels, often all of us go to airports or train stations. You see people working because all we do is work now in this country all the time. And so connecting to a Wi-Fi, just because it says free Wi-Fi, you don't know who is promoting or sponsoring that Wi-Fi. It could be a hacker sitting right next to you with a free Wi-Fi calling it free Amtrak. And so I think just recognizing you shouldn't just use anything that's free, whether that's a Wi-Fi, whether that's a charging station. I often see these device blocks that have all these cables coming out to say, hey, feel free to plug in and power. Who knows where that is and what that is? And just because it's free doesn't mean it's regulated. It has any type of compliance around it. It's updated. So just being thoughtful, I think, about where you are, what you're doing. There's a lot of free, simple tools you can use. If you want a free VPN, you can get one. There's for a couple dollars a month, you can get one. Cloudflare is a great free that gives you just an updated DNS that protects at least something that you're doing. On the password side, I know LastPass, I think they still give a free version where you could have a little bit better profile in the way you are using your password structure. So that's a long story, perhaps not one or two, but just in general, a heightened awareness of who you are, where you are, what you're doing is the most important thing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And if you were to likewise give just one or two ideas about primary business protection, what might you give there?
On the business side, again, I think it's back to not protecting in the castle, but protecting, where individuals are. And so with that, I think the compliance landscape is entirely changed. Both of you said it far more articulate than I did, and you know the exact rule and numbers that they are. I just know in general, from our perspective at Eisner, from our professionals, we are all much, much more concerned about compliance, regulation, and governance in general. Performing risk assessments is something that we start our conversations always with. I always say it's measure, manage, and monitor. And so the first step is in our engagements and talking to whomever we do is how do you measure your risk, whether you're trying to measure your risk to meet an SEC standard? Are you measuring a risk to meet your cyber insurance, which is some just basic things? You have to really measure where you are. As Brian said, a third party, I think, is much better than just asking your IT department to go check a list or your current MSP. Get a third party to check off where you are in terms of your compliance, your internal, your cybersecurity, and just some of the basic things. I can't tell you how many people still our companies are not educating their own employees. So doing cybersecurity training, we did a recent survey. I think almost 40% roughly of our companies aren't even doing it annually. And so in that survey, it's mind-blowing to me how people are not just educating their general shareholder stakeholders that are involved in that business.
Well, that is pretty stunning, Rahul. So I appreciate that. You've certainly provided some good insights today. We thank you for that. Brian, any other parting thoughts to maybe wrap up what Rahul's presented for us today?
More than anything, I appreciate you being here, Rahul. It's nice to have someone of your stature and of your firm's, one of your firm's leaders join us here on the podcast. If folks want to have a further conversation with you, how can they get a hold of you?
Very simply, if you go to our website, eisneramper.com, you can go to Outsourced IT. You'll see a lovely big picture of me, and it's pretty easy to get a hold of me. If you put my name in to Google, it's right there. I think also in this podcast, we'll have some information that's available. And as a free resource, we just released a cybersecurity ebook that can help individuals. I know it's listed on your website in the download section. And so that's another great asset and tool. And from there, our team can be reached as well.
Well, that's super. Well, we appreciate all of you listening in today, and we look forward to having you in a future accounting technology lab. Good day.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.